The warrant for the annual town meeting. We go with the beginning on page 102 in your town report on the warrant with Article 36 to see if the town will vote to accept the amended Berlin-Boylston Regional Agreement affecting the unification. We'll try to elocute better. Article 36, motion under Article 36. Angela Yildiz of the School Committee.
Angela Yildiz, 5 Marlborough Road. I move to accept the amended Berlin-Boylston Regional Agreement affecting the unification of the 3 existing school districts to be effective July 1, 2019, as shown on the copy dated May 7, 2018, and filed with the town clerk, copies of which have been passed out this evening.
Motion is to accept the amended Berlin-Boylston Regional Agreement affecting the unification of the 3 existing school districts to be effective July 1, 2019, as shown on the copy dated May 7, 2018, and filed with the town clerk, copies of which have been passed out this evening.
I know that you all love our town. We take a lot of pride in its small town character and our independence. I also know that you are very fond and proud of your elementary school. So let me reassure you, what we are here and talking about and voting on tonight is not about closing a school. It is not about taking from one school to give to another. It is about the way our current school system is structured and how that structure hinders what we can do for students. Let me explain. Currently, our school system is made up of 3 separate school districts. BMS is its own district governed by a 3-member Berlin School Committee. Boylston Elementary is its own school district governed by a 3-member Boylston School Committee. And our middle high school, Tohoto, is our regional school district governed by a 6-member regional school committee, which is appointed usually by the chair of each of the elementary committees. Each of these school districts is a separate legal entity with its own teachers union and contract. Adding to all this, we have a superintendency union, which is made up of the regional school committee members, whose responsibility is to hire and evaluate the superintendent. Having this superintendency union also allows the 3 districts to share the superintendent and the central office staff. What we are proposing is instead of 3 separate school districts, we will have 1 school district which contains 3 schools, and of course, 1 school committee. So why are we interested in doing this? We already have a record of success with our collaboration with Boylston in our current regional school district, Tohoto. Based on SchoolDigger.com rankings, Tohoto is in the 96th percentile. It is ranked 15 out of 348 Massachusetts high schools. Our elementary schools, however, have room for improvement, with Boylston Elementary in the 86th percentile and Berlin in the 71st. Boylston outperforms us with a ranking of 131 to our 275 out of 938 elementary schools in the state. So how can we improve our elementary schools? Well, there are some ways a fully unified school district can help. First, we will be able to fully align curriculum and professional development. Remember, each school is a separate legal entity, so we must write separate grants for professional development, and the amount of money received is not the same to each school. Therefore, we can't offer the same training opportunities in each of the schools. Also, if we have a staff member who is an expert or particularly skilled in an area, We can't give that teacher a stipend from Berlin and ask him or her to go mentor or train staff at another school. That's akin to paying one of our teachers to go give a workshop at Farley Elementary in Hudson. When we talk about aligning curriculum, we mean from one grade to the next and getting all students equally to Honto ready. And we also mean aligning curriculum across the same grade level between classrooms and schools. Our superintendent and curriculum director have talked about what happens when you are a unified school district. The first is a shift in mindset for the staff from separate to whole. Rather than standing as silos, all educators will become a single community responsible for the sharing and development, implementation, improvement, and sustainability of rigorous curricula with greater ownership. This allows for a greater exchange of fresh ideas and innovative teaching. You may ask, why can't this happen now? The schools do try, but imagine if at your job you were asked to work with a different company than your own and collaborate on a joint end product. It's not as easy as it sounds. Also, teachers may be teaching to the same Massachusetts state standards, but there are different ends of the spectrum of that standard. And where one may be teaching the basics, another may be teaching in a deeply engaging and enriching way. Authentic collaboration in a truly unified district allows us to raise the expectations and enrich learning for all students. Finally, we'd have a greater likelihood of better deals on books and technology due to bulk purchasing opportunities. Student needs are not static. When the needs of a student or classroom change, we don't have the flexibility to meet that change easily. We have some shared special education staff between the buildings, but in trying to meet changing student needs from year to year, the staff member may take their benefits from one building where they work the most hours one year, and then the next year it changes, so then the staff member has to take their benefits from the other building. And then, of course, the salary scales aren't the same. So the pay varies from year to year as well. This creates real inconsistency for the staff member, which, if we lose them, can create inconsistency for the students. This concerns us because our special needs students in particular thrive on consistency. Also, we vote a relatively small and tight budgets in May, last night. If a student moves in after the vote and needs extra supports or needs to be educated in a specialized setting, we can share special education reimbursement monies to support that student and the unexpected expense if we are fully regionalized, without needing to cut something out or postpone the planned purchase of textbooks or technology for the school. Right now, a one-school district is not very enticing for a talented teacher. The last teacher hired is the first one to go if a reduction in force, otherwise known as a layoff, is needed. So for teachers looking for work, a school system that has multiple buildings has more opportunities for advancement and a lower likelihood of a reduction in force. Also, our elementary buildings each have some part-time staff who work only in that school. For those staff that want full-time opportunities, we invest in giving them experience, and then they move on to full-time jobs elsewhere. In a unified district, we can combine more part-time positions into full-time. Whenever we have superintendent turnover, progress on education improvements and district vision stalls. Finally, there are several high-performing districts in our geographic area from which talented teachers and school leaders can choose. We want to be their top choice. Right now, your hard-earned tax dollars are paying our superintendent and the central office staff to do everything 3 times. Preparing extensive reports for the state, writing grants, separate technology databases, etc., 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 all in triplicate. Because we have 3 separate teachers' unions, it's time to negotiate a teacher's contract every year, which can sometimes be quite time-intensive. We'd much rather see our superintendent using his time in the school buildings, working with the principals and staff on best teaching practices. We'd rather see our curriculum director in the buildings mentoring staff on engaging and rigorous instruction. We'd rather see our pupil personnel director spend more time working with the special education staff, exploring intervention strategies for increased student growth. We'd rather see our business director have more time to research greater and more cost-effective procurement opportunities. But right now, everyone is busy doing duplication of tasks. Okay, well, that's all well and good, but the real question on your mind is, are we going to lose control of our elementary school? No. The beauty of a regional agreement is that everything is in writing. To protect our interest in keeping our elementary school the way it is, we have written into the agreement that each town must maintain their own K-5 elementary school. Well, what about representation on the school committee? We like our current makeup of 3 members from Berlin and 3 members from Boylston on the regional committee. We want to keep that, and we want all school committee members to have a full and equal vote. By state law, there are 5 ways to comprise a regional school committee. In order to keep the equal representation and equal vote, we must and have chosen the method where candidates will run on the ballot in both Berlin and Boylston, and elections will happen biannually during the November state and federal elections. What if I want to spend more or less on my elementary school than the other town? We can do that. We have an assessment methodology that was used in the Mount Greylock School District when they regionalized this past fall. The calculations primarily allocate the cost of each elementary school to the town in which the school resides. Our calculations of costs for Tohoto remain the same, which entails costs based on student enrollment from each town. What about the teachers? How does this affect them? Most things will be worked out during the bargaining process for the new district contract. Teachers' current contracts stay in effect until July 1, 2019. The teachers will choose which union they want to represent them. Right now, the elementary schools use MTA, and Tohoto uses AFT. No teacher can go backwards in salary by law, and Berlin teachers who are employed in the school as of July 1, 2019 will be eligible for retiree health insurance, which is currently already a benefit for Boylston Elementary and Tohoto teachers. Okay, but the real burning question you all are asking, will my taxes go up? No. But they won't go down either as a result of regionalization. This is a budget-neutral endeavor. Based on financial modeling, Boylston will see an annual increase of $33,364, and Berlin will see a decrease of $13,901. A more detailed chart of this is in your handout. What is the timeline for this to occur? Both towns need to vote to approve the amended regional agreement. Last night, Boylston, by an overwhelming majority, voted to approve. Now it's up to us. Then, Commissioner Riley of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed has until this December to approve the agreement. From January to June 2019, a new contract will be negotiated. July 1, 2019, the K-12 Regional School District goes into effect. In November 2020, the Transitional School Committee ends as the newly elected Regional School Committee members take over. We want an agreement that the Commissioner will ultimately approve. So we have been working with our liaison at the Department of Ed, sending language changes back and forth since January or February of this year. We thought everything was all set by the time the agreement went to print in your warrant booklets. However, in late April, our liaison required us to make some minor, non-substantial changes, so I'll walk you through those. The first is the school committee needs to elect the vice chair by ballot, so that was added. The next has to do with what happens if a district-wide vote for budget is required. Then there is a housekeeping item. The payment schedule was in the appendix, and it has been moved into the body of the document. And lastly, a newly discovered typo was found, so replacing a number 12 with a number 5. I wouldn't be standing here before you tonight if I didn't feel 100% that this was the right thing to do for our students and for our community. Thank you for listening, and please vote yes.
Finance Committee have a comment on this?
The Capital Planning Committee has a comment. The Capital Planning Committee has a comment.
Dave Westerling, Capital Planning Committee. A few of us have looked at the lease agreement, which is in Section 5, or Section 4, rather. We can turn to Section 4, where we're going our largest asset in Berlin is the building that we're sitting in. It's valued at about $9.3 million. And we've taken care of it over the years through the process of town meeting, and we voted on improvements to the building. Last night we voted on air conditioning improvement of $100,000. So we've taken good care of it over the years. And we're going to lease this building for $1 a year for 20 years. And I just wondered why, initially when we were talking about this, we were going to keep the building, but it looks like now we're going to lease it. And could you go over why we're leasing it rather than keeping the building?
I could attempt to answer that, but since our counsel, Russ Dupree, is here, I'm going to let him answer that, if it's all right with the moderator.
Yeah, sir, please introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Russell Dupree. I represent all three schools, actually. And the standard way for regional school districts to lease a building is a single dollar. So it seems odd, but you need some consideration for a lease. So what occurs is during the lease period, the regional school district would simply lease the building for the $1. Ultimately, at the end, if there was a situation where the building or the district no longer existed, for example, the building would still be the town's property. So it's just the standard way that regional school districts work. There are other ways to do it, but this is probably the most standard way to do it.
Buzz?
Just for clarification, Dave is chair of the Capital Planning Committee. He's also on the Finance Committee. Barry, you asked the Finance Committee's position. We are neutral on the question.
Are there others that wish to speak?
Betsy Eschelbacher, 43 West Street, mother of four. My question is, when we, in the past, have wanted a program for our school, for example, like therapeutic pony, a literacy program or whatever, and it has to go to town for them to approve the funds, right? Which I think in the past we did a literacy program. I would go for the therapeutic pony myself, but then my question is, if it has to go to town, then Boylston has a larger population than we have. So from a town vote perspective, will we ever be able to move forward with stuff like that? Is that question sort of clear? Do I need to give more clarity? No, so say we want to do a district-wide math program, and we have to, purchase the program, and each town has to vote for the funds to go to by the program. Say it's $100,000, split it down the middle, or 2/3, 1/3, whatever. And the town has to vote to say, yes, we will give the funds for that. So how does that, if there is at all, a factor? Thank you.
So how the allocation works is similar to how budgets work right now. The building principals meet with the staff, they decide what they want to do for their school, and then they present it to the superintendent, and the school committee votes to approve that budget. And then at that point, it comes to town meeting. The costs are primarily allocated for elementary school to the town. So if this town wanted a pony therapy program, you would need to get it passed by your principal first. And if he's gung-ho and the superintendent's gung-ho, then they would probably recommend it to the school committee, and then we discuss it. Okay? So it doesn't really matter what the other town wants to do. If their particular school budget wants something in particular, we can do that. And the beauty of the equal representation on the school committee is that the Berlin members are overseeing what their own elementary school wants to do and help advocating for that as well with an equal voice.
Hello, I'm Molly Langelier. I live at 8 Keys Road, and I started working as a speech therapist when we were still in the old building. I was only 5. So I moved into this building 6 months later, fell in love with the town. I wasn't raised here, but I definitely will die here, and decided that my kids needed to grow up in this community. So thinking about the changes that could come down the pike as an employee here, I'm one of the ones who might have the most shift and change because I am one of those specialists. I've spent the last 20 years in a windowless space here, although it's fabulously decorated. But I like that. I like knowing that it's pretty consistent. But at the same time, I think my smart side says we're wasting resources up above. And I think we counted at one point during a meeting, and I've had 7 superintendents in 20 years, which does make for a lot of change, a lot of shifting in education practices. And so even though I might be shifted out of my comfort zone, and yes, I will benefit from retiree health insurance, there are going to be a lot of things that I won't know about my job, my finances, changes maybe to my health care, or whether or not I can take a sick day if my aging mother gets ill. Those types of things are kind of troubling for teachers because we were used to living under a very pre-planned contract, and now everything will kind of go back up in the air. But I think that the greater logic is that we have been wasting a lot of time and energy running a business up above and not focusing as much as we could have on education and student progress, which is our product. So I'm supportive of it, but I can tell you that I'm only speaking for myself. There are only 2 of us that live in town that work in the building. The other is Ms. Broadmerkel, who grew up here and is first grade. I don't know what her opinion is on this. I can only tell you that as a town member and somebody who absolutely is in love with this place, I'm voting yes.
Someone else? Peter?
Peter Hoffman. I'd be remiss if I didn't say something in one of these meetings, so here we go. The Economic Development Committee supported this and voted in favor 4-0 and 1 abstention. And the thinking was the efficiencies that Angela and others have talked about really make a lot of sense. So we felt that that made sense and voted in favor of it. And I personally support it as well for the same reasons. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Tim Wheeler to come up and act as temporary moderator for the rest of this article. Is there someone else that wants to speak now? Your hand? Oh. Whose hand was up? Yours.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a big mouth. This is me speaking as myself, Buzz Harris, 21 Village Lane, not as a member of the Finance Committee. I'm genuinely undecided on this at this point. I appreciated the information that Angela and the school board provided. A positive that I can see beyond making the administration's life simpler is, I think, some teachers that teach half-time in one elementary school building and half-time in the other would now be able to be employed full-time and get benefits, and I think that's a good thing. One small concern I have is I have visibility into the town of Boylston's budgeting, just because we fund Tohoto jointly with them. And let me say in advance, I like the town of Boylston, since I'm about to say something bad about them. They can make a penny scream louder than anyone I've almost ever met. And their usual way of school budgeting is to say, before there's ever any conversation with the school board or anyone else, here's the money you get, that's it. Whereas we in Berlin look at the information provided by Tohoto and the school board and have a conversation with them about levels of funding. Boylston is not flexible about that. So that causes me some concern. I'm actually going to reiterate the question that I think Ms. Eschelbacher asked earlier in a different way. It'd be a little more specific maybe. Angela, if both elementary schools were being funded under the regional district and we here in Berlin decided that we wanted to implement a program in Berlin Memorial, could we fund that and implement it without the town of Boylston in their town meeting needing to address it? Does that make sense? Because I didn't quite feel the question got to that point last time. Thank you.
So Angela, do you want to help us, or?
Yeah.
All right.
There's really two different questions there. So I think I'll call up Bob to talk first about Boylston and their financial perspective and position.
Thank you. Could you introduce yourself, Bob?
My name's Bob Connery. I'm the
Speak right up to the mic there.
Director of Financial Services for the school system. So we have, I've been in the district 2 years. We have a superintendent who's been in the district 6 months. I observed during last year, and we talked about the level of funding we have in the elementary school. It's something that they have had a significantly lower tax base, commercial tax base. And one of the challenges has been growing the commercial tax base. They've added a FedEx facility that's going to bring $1.5 million into the town. This year we advocated heavily for the elementary school, and we had a very large increase, 7.2%, to basically bring up the elementary budget and fund some important needs. We feel like we're in a position now, in a good place with Boylston Elementary School. They're also looking at other commercial opportunities. So I guess I would comment that the general question was about Boylston's finances. I mean, Berlin has had a lot of growth with Highland Commons. I don't know how long that's going to continue, but the timing of some of this growth, 3 years down the line, you might be in similar places with the growth they're going to have. But I did want to emphasize specifically this year, they did support a large increase in their budget. We've showed them information on per pupil spending and indicated where we see ourselves going. We'll advocate for what we need. That's partly our job as a school district, and maybe we haven't sufficiently advocated before. So it is the school administration and school committee's job to advocate for what we need in the schools. So some of the disparity in funding is probably because we need to do a little bit more of that, and we did this year. So I feel like we are in a much better place going into FY19 than we have been for a couple of years.
I know the finances of Boylston have been on people's minds. So the Department of Revenue has this awesome data dashboard. So I wanted to share with you revenue versus expenditure for each of the two towns. The town of Boylston for 2016 had a $3 million, I'm not sure if I'm reading this right, $3,400,000 revenue, and they expended $3,167,000. Doesn't seem right, but I think I'm reading it wrong. Maybe I should have Bob back up. And Berlin had a revenue of $4,501,000 and spent $4,102,000.
The figures seem a little ajar.
There,
So,
there.
Bob, do you want to come?
Tax rate slide, the rest doesn't matter. Should I share the stabilization fund? I do. Because Berlin's stabilization fund in 2017, according to the DOR, was $728,532. And in Boylston, it was $1,280,895.
All right. Go ahead.
And now I'd like to call up our superintendent, Jeffrey Zangi, to speak to Buzz's second question.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Zangi, the superintendent. So there was a question about whether Berlin could have a program that they wanted that Boylston could possibly vote against. And there are some programs that we want to be unified. The idea of having a unified vision, a unified mission, is that there are some things that we want to be consistent. We want curriculum to be consistent, for example. But other things like therapeutic pony, if that's something that the school thought would be best, we would look at that separately. They would be able to, so there is autonomy in the schools.
Are there others that wish to speak? Yes.
Amy Bodette, River Road West. I don't have any kids in the system, but I just kind of hope for the best, plan for the worst. What kind of escape clause do we have if everything just really goes bad and we really want that pony?
Does someone wish to answer that question from the school committee? Sure.
Hi, Russ Duperret again. So we set up the regular budget, so there's flexibility to try and do that type of thing if the committee votes and we go through the process Angela described. There's also a second way, which is really the fail-safe, and it's something that Bridgewater Raynham, for example, used to do years ago. I don't know if they still do. But sometimes if a town really wants something, they can go to their own town meeting and you could have a separate warrant article, and that warrant article could fund something special for the elementary, for one particular elementary school. So that's another way to do it. Now, obviously, you would need the committee's approval to take the extra funds, which committees always do. But that's the way it would work. So that's a second way you could make it happen. That route doesn't require Boylston to vote. It would only require Berlin town meeting to vote and the full school committee. So that's the second way.
But if
So-
we decide we want to just de-region.
Oh, leave the district?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you have, in your current agreement, it would be the same process that you would use for Tohoto. So there's a withdrawal section, and there's a process to allow that to happen. But you'd need to follow that same process. So it's actually somewhat similar to what you're doing now. Amendment and withdrawal is a similar process. So there is language to do that.
Bill Anderson, Beach Hill Road. So regarding the retiree health care benefit, is that included in the $13,000 cost increase? My understanding is that health benefits are actually paid for the teachers by the town, not the school system. How does that affect this?
So right now, your Berlin School Committee, your Berlin teachers are employees of the town of Berlin. When we fully regionalize, they become employees of the regional school district. So they come into the regional school district health insurance plan. Right now, we have a much greater cost savings at the regional health insurance plan. That's where you get a big chunk of your savings from. And then the other thing is we get regional transportation, which we currently don't have for the BMS students. We do for the Tohoto students. So that's another ongoing source of revenue that doesn't go away. It varies slightly from year to year. And then, what else I want to ask? So,
As these teachers start to retire, there's going to be more cost. Is that projected?
Yes, so Bob, in his financial analysis, if you look at the sheet with analysis on it, you can come on up, Bob, in case I misspeak, shows what the cost would look like. He put it in for like the first year, so I'm going to let him talk, and then I'll say one other comment.
So,
Speak right into the mic there.
two things on the health costs. So the town and whether the town is paying for it or the school, it's still coming out of the assessment for Berlin taxpayers. It's just going to come through an assessment as opposed to a town budget line. So either way, the health care of Berlin Memorial employees who are active is being paid for by Berlin.
Well, we don't have a retiree benefit currently, so it'll be a new...
I wasn't talking, so the retiree part, I'll address that first. So this is for active employees. So there's significant savings on the active employees based on the cost of our plan. That's offset somewhat by an assumption of paying retiree benefits. We've assumed, looking at the number of people in Tohoto and how many are in Berlin, we're able to estimate what the cost of retiree benefits would be, a little bit over $40,000 for retiree benefits. However, so we factor that in, that's factored into this analysis of an overall decrease of 13. The reality is we wouldn't be paying any retiree benefits in year one because this is not retroactive to people who retired in Berlin. It would be people who retire from the regional district. And in year one of a regional district, we're not going to have any retirees unless they retire on July 1st. So I think we've been conservative in estimating the 40,000. But at some point down the line, that's what we expect it'll get up to and then grow with inflation, like everything else.
10 years down the road, what do you think it'll cost?
I think 40,000 is a fair estimate of what it'll be 10 years down the road.
Thank you.
Thank you. Angela, did you want to?
And I just wanted to add to that I know people might be concerned about having the added expense of a retiree health insurance, which we currently don't have in this school. But I would remind you that the regional transportation reimbursement offsets what you'd be paying for health insurance, so it's a wash in my mind. Also, you are inadvertently paying for it right now because Boylston Elementary and Tohoto both have that retiree health insurance benefit. And when it's time to negotiate a contract, the teachers read the contracts of the other schools. So this union here at this school knows that the other two schools that they share a superintendent with and a central office staff have this benefit and they don't. So what do? We give them a higher salary. And that's why BMS, Berlin Memorial, has the highest scaled teacher salary of the 3 districts.
Yes.
Tricia Concannon, 79 South Street. So I'm interested in the performance more than the finances. And I see there's a disparity between Berlin Memorial School performance and Berlin Elementary School performance. So with this regionalization, do you see that comes closer? Will the performance levels become closer to each other, or will they separate more. Thank you.
Our expectation is that with a unified district, the performance will come closer together. We'd have a unified mission, unified vision and mission. We'd have a unified curriculum. Would make the whole process much easier to assess what's going on in the schools.
Thank you. Others that wish to speak? Mr. Ager.
Barry Yeager, 51 South Street. Since 1960, we've had a unified school district with one superintendent and the same people serving on the committees, even though they've been three different legal entities. Since 1960, we've been operating as one school district, even though our finances and a variety of other formalities have had to be separated. Since education reform in the 1990s, the school committees have had virtually no power over curriculum or program because that power has been vested in the superintendent of schools. So if you have a real difference in evenness of how your students are prepared, that's the fault of your previous superintendents who've had 20 years to take care of it if they had anything that they thought needed doing. We have been having region-wide curriculum committees for 30, 35 years. I used to serve on them when I was working here. And we've had unified curriculums in subject after subject after subject for all three schools, with people participating from all the schools, and then those curricula were adopted by all three school committees. There's a certain amount of this that just doesn't make any sense because we've really had it unified up to this time, and most of those differences should long ago have been erased if they were significant. I'm opposed to this change. The election of school committee members under this system is going to be in a general election where people are going to vote for president, United States senator, governor, whatever. And we'll have perhaps twice as many people participating in those elections than we have in the regular election, in the regular town elections. Now that's not all bad, that's good participation. However, the reality is that other half of the people pretty much go in there to vote for president or governor. And they're not necessarily as well informed on local affairs as the people that go and vote in a town election. The town of Boylston has half again as many voters as we do, some 1,100 more voters than we do. And that means that all the members from Berlin being elected district-wide have the potential of having Boylston votes affect that choice. Needless to say, Berlin votes can affect the Boylston choices, except that there are more Boylston voters than there are Berlin ones. So you've got the potential, especially in a highly contested election, that one town can determine who the representatives are from the other town. The other thing about that all is that that election is on a big, long state ballot. It's down with the Register of Deeds in the things that a lot of people don't vote for or don't pay much attention to. And in order to be known, you're going to find that school committee elections are going to be like legislative elections and statewide elections, where the soundbite, the political ads, and the lawn signs are going to have more to do with who gets elected than the voters' knowledge of the person that they're voting for, which is more commonly so now for us. The regional agreement that you have before you that we're voting on has a section about apportionment of costs on pages 6 and 7 and 8. Now, one of the things that's often been pushed with the regionalization of K through 12 is that we could have a simpler financial situation in the superintendent's office instead of three separate sets of books to keep. But if you look at the sections about budgeting on 9 and 10, and also the apportionment things on those other pages I just mentioned, you'll find that it's a very complicated system to determine the town's assessment from the regional school district. Right now, since Proposition 2.5, a town meeting such as this one has had the legal power to cut the bottom line of the school budget for the town schools. We have seldom used it here. It sounds like Boylston might use it a little over there, but you're going to lose that because now everything is going to come as an assessment from the school district, figured out according to this very complicated formula that you see there. And goodness knows you hope it's done right, because I don't know who's going to be checking it. Probably the state, but who knows. And that complicated formula is going to determine the majority of the tax bill. And the town meeting's ultimate authority on it is limited. The local town meeting basically is either accept it and vote the money, or cause a dispute which could lead to a two-town district meeting or other extreme situations, court cases or whatever, to determine what you finally pay. So you're giving up your autonomy to make a simple decision at the local level to a much more complicated system, and you're giving up the relative, I mean, I've never thought school budgets were simple, but compared to this way that this has to be apportioned, the present school budgeting system does look simple. I don't think we've come up with the right kind of a thing to do this yet, and I think we should vote this down at this time. Perhaps in the future, more work can be done on it and a better proposal made.
Does anyone from the school committee want to comment? Superintendent.
I don't know where to start with that. I think what you're giving up is some irrational fears about things that probably won't happen, and you're giving them up for the benefit of your students. And I can't speak to what happened in 1960. I can tell you we don't put kids in ungraded rooms anymore. We take care of them. We educate them. And it's correct, until 1994, it was the school committees who primarily were in charge of curriculum, and that's been done away with. They put it in the hands of the school department. They also added accountability. And since they've done that, Massachusetts has been in the top 3 every year in the country. So it wasn't a bad idea to hand over the education of children to educators. In school districts, the driving force for success in schools, as it turns out, really is an achievement directly. It's school culture, and that's driven by vision and mission. And once you have a culture that's successful, teachers begin to take ownership for their work. They in turn let students take ownership for work. And then you start seeing achievement. It goes to a question that was asked about, do we think that the assessments will balance out? So all I can tell you is that I think this is good for children. It's a good move for children. I can't speak about things that happened 40, 50 years ago. I can tell you this, in terms of money, this is what I know for sure. My time is your money. You pay every day for me to do things 3 times. You pay Bob every day to do things 3 times. And you might think, well, you know, superintendent, you don't do much with finances. But I meet every day with Bob, I meet every day with the special education department. I meet every day with Carol, who writes the grants 3 times. And so much of my time is spent doing things 3 times. That's not hypothetical. That's not a prediction. That's what's going to happen tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. I don't know all the things that could possibly happen, but I do know if you give this a yes vote, we'll have a unified mission, we'd have a unified vision in the district, we'd have a unified curriculum, and students would be better off.
Others that wish, yes.
Try not to shake so much this time. I do care about what happened 50 years ago, and I have great respect for Barry Yeager. I've read his books. Can't wait for the next one, to be honest. I'm just going to comment on the curriculum piece, because in the last 15 years or so that I really got involved in that piece, I have sat through sometimes week-long trainings to understand a new social emotional curriculum or a new literacy program. In fact, I actually stood up here probably about 12 years ago when Mr. Richard Borowick was the principal, and I begged you guys to approve the Leslie Literacy Collaborative so that we would have a coach at certain levels. Boylston was presented with the same information, the same training, but in the end decided not to go with it. And we spent years in this building doing that until the new superintendent came along and we abandoned it and went with a different thing. So I agree that we all get a lot of the same information, but we aren't required as separate school districts to adopt those things. And maybe in the past the others did adopt, but in my experience, what we do a lot of times doesn't mesh. There are some exceptions to that for sure, and like I said, I am happy to be hearing all the different viewpoints tonight. Thank you.
Yes. I apologize, I don't know everyone's name. It's not one of my talents, so I apologize. But if you'll introduce yourself, that'd be
Hi,
great.
I'm Tom Fleming, 43 Ball Hill. I was on the school committee for 4 years. I finished up my term just a year ago. And this concept of regionalization has come up quite a bit over the years. And when I first started on this school committee, it was a topic that had re-raised itself again, and we had a study. And when we had that study, we got the results back, and based on those results, I voted no. I voted against bringing it forward to the towns. Now that I look what the school committees have done since then, and the hard work that's gone into putting this agreement together, I am definitely voting yes for this tonight. I think this is a real opportunity that we have as a town to get into a really good agreement here. Right, we're talking about K through 5, right? Our middle school and high school is already regionalized, and it does really, really well. Right, I think if you, I've always kind of used 3 criteria to kind of think what I would want to do here. First is ensuring the nurturing environment that our school offers our kids. And I think this agreement still allows us to do that, right? We still have our autonomy. We still have the community very well invested in this school. So that one is done, check. The next is finances. This is not going to raise our finances. If anything, I think it's going to help us in the long term, bring some greater discipline to our cost structure here. So I think for the long term, this is going to be a good agreement. The third one that I always got hung up on was academics. Will this improve the academics of our elementary here? And some of the studies that have been done have really shown mixed results at other schools that have done this. And that's one that's really kind of pulled at me, what is a good basis for us to look at this information? And you talk to the teachers and administrators here, they will tell you, based on their expertise, that they will now be able to spend less time on the bureaucracy, right? This agreement gets rid of the bureaucracy that we've created and allows our educators to spend more time educating. But I think we also have the data within our district that shows that our middle school and high schools do much better than our elementary schools. And Boylston, yes, does better than ours, but our middle school and high schools do better than our elementary schools separately. So I think on all three of those criteria, this is a very good opportunity for us as a town. And I'm going to vote for it. And I'm somebody that was voting no in the past. I think what we have in front of us today is a really good agreement, and I'm going to be voting yes on this agreement.
Buzz?
I just want to thank the school committee and the folks from the district for their answers. They had pretty good answers to my questions, which I just wanted to say. And by the way, I know there has been some irritation back and forth between the finance committee and the school committee at times. But I'm genuinely, if I say I'm neutral on something, that's not me being sneaky and opposing you. It's really being neutral. Angela's laughing behind her hair now, which is fine. I was opposed in the beginning. You've gotten me to not being sure. And I'm pretty stubborn, so that's not so bad. But I do have a question based on some things Barry had to say. Will the way in which a unified elementary school, how do I make this? At this point, the district will be presenting a budget to Berlin if we pass this for a fully unified district. Is anything about that going to change? Barry said that he felt that we would lose some autonomy, and I'm trying to understand what that means. One last comment aside, I want to say, Bob, I don't know what you put in the coffee when you were talking to the people in Boylston, but whatever you did to get them to give you a 7% increase, my hat is off to you. Sorry, my aside drowned out my question. My question is anything going to, the way that the budget request is formulated will change. I understand that from those pages of your document. But, you're still going to come to us and present us with a potential budget. We're still going to make, sad faces at you. You're going to talk to us about children and try to make us feel guilty. It's the way it goes. It's fine. What substantively about that process will change such that, in Barry's way of looking at it, we might lose some autonomy? I'm curious.
There's a slight efficiency at town meeting. You'll have one school budget vote instead of the Tohoto vote and the Berlin Memorial School vote.
So I expect in the first year, we're going to
Right
want to
into
spend
the
some
mic,
time,
Bob.
want to spend some significant time with both finance committees to walk through the first budget, and I think it'll be a lot easier after that. But from a transparency perspective, there's my plan, and our plan should be to basically present, here's what your Berlin Memorial budget looks like, here's what the Tohoto budget looks like, and here's your share of both. You'll get a percentage share of the Tohoto budget, and you'll have all of the Berlin budget, but we would present both numbers to the Finance Committee. So I don't think it'll be significantly different. It will be in the form of town meeting one assessment. Some of the question was raised about it being complicated. What we're doing for Tohoto will be allocated the same way. What we're doing for Berlin Memorial, some of the details in allocating state aid are different, but basically Berlin is still paying for Berlin Memorial School, Boylston's still paying for Boylston Elementary School. So I don't really see it as that complicated. And when we put the data on paper, it will be transparent. People will be able to see how we come up with the budget and we will have school budgets as well.
Wayne? Are you going to move?
Wayne Texera, Gates Pond Road. I guess I've been listening to a lot of the questions. I mean, I'm a product of Berlin Memorial School and Tohoto Regional, and I think it makes sense to me. I think that, you know, it is about the kids, certainly, but I think that there are, I think there's certainly a separation that still exists between the two towns. I think there's nothing better for kids than to feel that they're one and they're coming to the table when they come together to be equal instead of separate, which I think still exists today as it did God knows how long ago, I won't say. But, you know, I think that, you know, there were questions about the elections. I'm not concerned about that. I mean, I don't know when the last time there was a contested school committee position, but I don't see people beating down the doors for these positions. Anybody want to run for it? Because I know I wouldn't. And I think that, you know, I think you have to look at it not just from, I think, a kid's perspective. I do think you need to look at it from a business perspective, which I do think you outlined. I do think that this is not just about, you know, when you say, oh, reducing the triplicate, it's not about making people's lives easier. That makes it hard for us to attract quality candidates. That's about, you know, having good staff in the schools. It's about our tax base. It's about what makes our properties valuable because it's a school, it's a town and a school district that people want to move to. And, you know, I think that it's not small to talk about it when you apply, you know, what goes on in those offices to our own lives working, you know, out in our own jobs. We would not work with that. Most of us would not want to work with that level of dysfunction of doing things 3 times and trying to negotiate across town lines. I think that is the reason that it makes perfect sense that is why the scores are not the same. You know, people have their own little fiefdoms as it is now, and when they don't want to cooperate, they won't. This allows there to be cooperation and makes perfect sense from K to 12. And, you know, we aren't in here. We didn't spend the time. I didn't go to any of their, you know, meetings, and they've spent a lot of time doing this. And I'm a big believer, having been a selectman 26 years ago, that, you know, we all come here to town meeting and vote on these things, but a lot of us never show up to hear all the work that was done to come to this point. These people were elected. They're hired on our behalf. We put our taxpayer dollars into, you know, their expertise, and I, for one, believe that if we're going to hire them, we're going to vote them in, and they're going to do the work. We owe it to them to listen to what they're having to say. I think it's really easy to be afraid of change. Berlin is not a town. While we respect our tradition, we like our town the way that it is and have maintained it that way. I think through a lot of talent over the years, I don't think we're a town either that turns a blind eye to progress. And to me, this seems to be smart progress after how many years this regional agreement has been the way that it is, to finally make it unified and not make Berlin and Boylston students feel separate when they come to Toronto, to be one and be educated the same way.
Chris?
So I have a question for all of you tonight. How many of you actually sat and read the regional agreement and understood it? Okay, well, that's good. I spent the weekend reading the regional agreement, and today I spent about an hour and a half on the phone with Bob Conry, the finance director, to ask my questions and actually point out a couple of typos, and it may be an error. So I guess my suggestion is that if we're going to vote in favor of it, we vote in favor of it with a caveat of some kind where we can get the language tightened up and corrected, or vote it down.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Melissa DeFonso, and I live on Gates Pond Road, and I am currently an educator at Hudson High School as a school counselor, and both of my children are an 8th and 9th grader at Tohoto Regional High School. I love Tohoto Regional High School. They started here at Berlin Memorial, and it is such a great school. I ask them every year, would you like to come to Hudson with me to School Choice Inn? And they say, no, Mom, we love it here. We think it's great. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the reasons why I'm in favor of the regionalization. I really feel that as an educator, it can be lonely. And you're saying, how could that possibly be lonely? You're surrounded by children all the time, right? No, we are lonely because we're so busy teaching all the time. And as a school counselor, I rarely see my colleagues, except for the time that we have that common professional development planning time. It allows us at the high school to see our colleagues at the elementary schools or at the middle schools and come together and work together. And so, for example, we just really had this wonderful mindfulness and DBT training. And it wasn't just the high school, but it's something that we'd all adopted, that from the top down, from the superintendent to our administrators, and collectively all came together and said, hey, you know what? This would be great for our kids. This would be fantastic. So I think when I hear everyone talking about coming together, it's really for the kids. And when you have a superintendent who is going to bring in some structure and everything will be under one roof and kind of streamlined, we always talk about how students thrive in structured environments. Well, educators do as well too. We like to know what's coming. We like to know timelines. We like to know what the expectation is. And it's not all under one umbrella. But right now, you have 3 different schools with 3 different philosophies. And I'm going to say, I point to someone who brought up the contract. Yes, we are negotiating as well at my particular school. But I have to tell you, those things all fall into place. Just like the finances and everything else will all fall into place. And when we talk about those things, we always think about the students. What is in the best interest of the students? How can we bring them all together? How can we pool all of our resources to give them what they need? And the rest, it always falls into place. So for me, I am voting yes, and I hope that many of you will also vote yes as well. Thank you.
Janet, are you wanting to speak?
You knew my name, I'm impressed. Janet Lamy, 102 Derby Road. I have to honestly say that at the beginning of this, I was too against it. However, this committee has done a phenomenal job, and they deserve this yes vote. I am also a product of Berlin Memorial and Tohoto Regional, and as a 7th grader at Tohoto, yes, we were behind those Boylston students, and it was very noticeable. However, Tohoto is such a great school. By the time we got to 9th and 10th grade, we were just as competitive as the rest of them. I think this curriculum between the 2 schools from K to 12 is going to be phenomenal, and I think we're forgetting what we're here for. It's the children. It's not the finances, it's not the money. We're spending this money anyways. It doesn't matter that the money is being spent. Whether it's spent in Berlin or Boylston or Tohoto, we're spending the money. And what we're missing is the better for the children. So I am voting yes, and kudos to this group. I also have sat on the school council while my children were at Berlin Memorial, and I am now on the Tohoto one, and we have lost numerous superintendents because of this issue of 3 different things 3 times over. And this week at our school council, we have a 5-year plan. And I am like so excited that I'm not going to be able to see it finish because my son will be graduating. But to have a superintendent to want to do a 5-year plan, we can't keep them. This is like the best of the best. And I'm voting yes, and great job.
Mr. Bradley.
Steve Bradley, 3 South Street. Before the debate is terminated, I would like to make a motion to vote this article on paper ballot.
We have a second. The majority is all we need, and it is debatable, though, as I recall. So we have a motion on the floor that's been seconded to have the vote taken by paper ballot. Does anyone wish to comment? So we'll do this by voice vote first. All those in favor of taking the vote, the final vote by paper ballot, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. It is pretty clear people want to vote by hand or voice. So we'll proceed now to the rest of the debate. Mr. Hoffman.
Peter Hoffman, how long has Tohoto been a unified district?
1962.
So I don't know much about schools. That's not my specialty, but isn't the proof in the pudding that that has worked very, very well? It's been a long time, and we would have 4 school districts, I think, if that hadn't been unified. So it seems that the proof is in the pudding. That's worked very, very well, and this should just accelerate the efficiencies, the improvements for students, and the time that's spent will be better spent on students, hopefully, not paperwork, administration, and triplicate efforts. As for Barry's comment about elections, there's only, say, 20% of us that vote in the town elections, and maybe 10% that show up at these evening town meetings. So there's a very small minority of us that care enough to participate. I think that same caring behavior will continue through, whether it be a town election date or a state or a federal election date. And I think it's as the saying goes, a distinction without a difference. Those that care will show, and those that don't still will not. I think it's become pretty clear that my vote supports this measure, and I hope you all do as well.
Others that wish to speak? Yes.
My name is Charlene DeCalagero. I'm from Village Court. I am a library trustee, and I worked with some of the leading scholar practitioners in the country on school improvement and teacher professional development at Lesley University for well over a decade. So one of my responsibilities was to look at research on what affects student learning and school achievement. And I can tell you one of the themes that kept coming up over and over was that if you have lots of turnover at the top, you really disrupt learning in schools. So if one of the issues here is that we have redundant administrative tasks that take away from the superintendent's and/or principal's time as curriculum leaders, then you are impacting student learning negatively. So another thing, just in terms of voting, I wanted to address Mr. Egger's concerns about that. My understanding as somebody who has run on those for legislative office that it seems like nobody votes for, I have noticed that Berlin has a very high turnout rate, one of the highest in the entire state. And I believe, if I got this right from the materials, the school committee votes would be in the November elections, not I'm getting nods. So this would be November, so there's higher turnout in November than May, I'm pretty confident. And our turnout has, I'm very proud to say, been consistently high here in Berlin. So, so I'm I'm pretty confident that people will be as engaged as ever, that will not change, and that maybe it will even improve if we vote for this regionalization. And my understanding is also that the board would be half from each town, 3 from each town. So at that level, we should have an equal voice. So on the whole, this seems like a good idea. Thank you.
Bill? And then I'm going to do Chris. Did you want to? Okay.
Bill Anderson, Peachtree. Maybe I missed this. What happens if Boylston approves the budget and Berlin doesn't, or vice versa? What happens to resolve that?
So what happens if one town in a 2-town region does not pass the budget is the budget would fail, go back to the school committee would relook at the budget and submit another budget to the towns. If that one also failed, which means either town votes no, then it would go to a district-wide election, and in that case it'd be in one location. Both towns would come to a meeting like this and vote on the budget. If that failed, then you would go to a budget imposed by DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and that's what's called a 1/12 budget. So basically, it means they take last year's budget, divide it by 12, so by month, basically, and you would live with that budget until the towns could approve a budget themselves. So that's the process. Now, the 1/12 budget, by the way, I'll add that typically they don't do just last year's budget. They'll give you some increase so you can actually move forward in a productive way. That's pretty rare to get to that point, though. So usually either in your first round or your second round, a budget's approved. But in rare circumstances, you could get to that district-wide election vote.
Chris?
So I'd like to make an amendment to the motion. In addition to the language that Angela read in the motion, I'd like to add, and further to request as a resolution that the school committee give further consideration to amending the language of the agreement without changing the intent of the regional agreement, with input from both towns. Meaning, there's a few things in the agreement that I think could be made clearer, and if the school committee, if I can help in any way, it wouldn't change any of the intent of the agreement, but I just feel like when I joined the subcommittee for this,
what I should do is
cut me off?
Take your motion.
Okay.
Ask for a second, see if it passes,
All right.
and then ask you to explain it.
Okay. Sorry.
In greater detail.
I was looking at question faces.
Yeah, I know, but if you've started to make a motion, I think I've got to jump on that motion. That's my sense. So, and I've got a second. I took it as a motion.
Oh, okay.
I mean, because it's here and written, and I think you read it to me. So, and further to request
And further to request as a resolution.
And further to request as a resolution that the school committee give further consideration to amending? Is that?
To amending the language of the regional agreement.
To amending the language of the regional agreement. And you conferred with council in regard to this. Can I just ask what the implications are in regard to making a modification to our article that would differ from the language that Boylston passed? If you could speak to that.
See you, Mr. Moderator. First, I'd like to apologize for my handwriting. I know it's bad.
Oh, it's yours. Oh. I'm sorry, Chris.
As I spoke to Chris and actually another... Hello? Is that better? Okay. As Chris and a couple of other speakers have mentioned, they have some questions or concerns with just small pieces of what's before you tonight. The main motion on the floor is to adopt the agreement, the amended agreement that you've all been talking about. The purpose of this amendment would just be more as a resolution to encourage the regional school committee to take comments from Berlin, anyone in Berlin or Boylston as well, to perhaps tweak any things that people might think would improve it. Not to vote it down, not to be against the complete regionalization, but just be willing to kind of take another look at it over the next few months, where a special town meetings could revisit it in the fall if needed.
Are there others that, why don't I have you, Chris, begin to comment a little more if you want.
May I speak?
I'm going to let Chris just clarify just a little bit more, because I think that might help.
I was asked to be a part of the subcommittee, I guess because I have school committee background of the 3 selectmen. And I said the first night, convince me. And I think I can be convinced if we could tighten up the language a bit. But otherwise, I'm a little concerned reading some of it unless we make sure that the changes are made. So this would just be a resolution to work with the school committee on just making sure that what the intent is clear.
Yeah, because I told you could speak.
Hi, Jim Keefe, 20 Bailey Road. My assignment for the weekend when my wife was reviewing it was to try and figure out what this Chapter 78 is. And in trying to dig through that on the websites and go through it all, I basically was able to get a brief understanding of what happens there. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is that Berlin gets significantly more aid on a per-student basis than Boylston and Tohoto. And digging into that, I found it was because of the KOC, which is kind of community. So basically, our community is a very good community. It has high pay scales that drives higher salaries for teachers and things like that. So our school is, quote, more expensive to get teachers, which is the main part of the budget. So when I looked at Tohoto, Tohoto has a comparable to Boylston Elementary. So the numbers for FY18, Berlin got $2,839 per student. Boylston Elementary got $1,700 per student, and Tohoto got $2,052 per student. So if you take that times our class size, that's about $128,000 difference in state aid that we would get if they switch us to the same class of town as we have for Tohoto. Do we know what's going to happen to that aid when we regionalize? Is our town demographic going to change to the combined of Berlin and Boylston?
What I want you to do is address the motion that's on the floor, and I think your question is in regard to the content of the main text.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask that we stick to the motion that we're handling here to amend.
Okay.
I should have jumped on you sooner. You intend to speak to the motion that we're considering the amendment? Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
Cliff Laporte, Gates Pond Road, Berlin School Committee member and chairperson of the regional district. Quite frankly, I'm not sure what I want to say. I'm filtering my real thoughts. I'm going to try to maintain my professional composure. The document that you would be approving or not approving this evening is the school committee's best effort at this point in time to create a K-12 regional school district. If you were in favor of regionalization, you're in favor. If you're opposed, you're opposed. If you're opposed, that means that we didn't work hard enough to persuade you. I take responsibility for that. But to propose an amendment at the town meeting floor is clearly meant to circumvent the work that we have done. This document is not perfect, and it is going to be reviewed, should it be approved, by the Department of Education, and they will come back, and I'm sure they will have tweaks as well. But it is not going to change the intent. I encourage you not to support an amendment because it's not the... You shouldn't vote yes or no because of the document. You should vote yes or no because that's what you believe is good for kids, and that's what you believe is good for the town, and you trust the school committee to do the right thing to work this out. So I would oppose any changes to this. Thank you for listening to me.
Are there others that wish to speak to the motion? Mr. Hoffman.
Peter Hoffman, this question might be directed at Attorney Riley more than the group here. Does the Attorney General need to review this? No, the motion, the article, if it's passed.
Department of Education.
Okay, so I thought the Attorney General would have to review it and it would be considered sufficiently vague to be shot down. But if the Department of Education does the same task as what I understand the AG would do for a bylaw, for example, I wonder if the amendment would trigger some concerns with language or it being vague or not clearly defined to the townspeople and therefore be shot down, and therefore constructively the motion would not the motion, yeah, the motion would, and the main text would be rejected as if it was voted down. I wonder if you could address that, Mr. Riley.
Yes, sir.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, and I also realize I didn't quite answer your question before. All this amendment would do, it still leaves the main motion on the floor, which is to approve this document, but just add as a resolution to continue discussion, if you will, with the Regional School Committee. So if you voted in favor of this amendment, that would not change anything in here. It would not change anything from what Boylston approved last night. That would still be able to go off to the Commissioner of Education for review. This would really just be sort of a non-binding request to kind of continue looking at this as approved to see if there's any additional changes that anyone might want to make. So it would not, in my opinion, it would have no effect on what the Commissioner of Education would be looking at if both towns have approved it.
Others that wish to speak? Angela?
Mrs. Keefe has had this document since January, February. We have gone back and forth with the Department of Education already. They will go back and forth again. This is a stall tactic, and I think most of you see that for this. We're here to vote for regionalization. I hope someone will call this to question. My babysitting's running out.
So we're still discussing the, okay. Does anyone else have anything further to say in regard to the motion, the amendment here to the motion? I don't think we need that. I don't see anybody else that wants to move forward. So this is a motion to add to the standing motion, and it would read, and further to request as a resolution that the school committee give further consideration to amend the language of the regional agreement with input from the towns without changing the intent. Is that fair, Chris? Did I?
Sounds good.
And council? Yes, okay. So all those in favor of the motion to amend, please signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Okay. Thank you. Okay, we'll proceed back now to the original motion. Do people have further comments to make in regard? Yes, I should. No, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was out of turn. Yeah, so really the question is, when we look at the finances for this, have we taken into account that the Chapter 70 funding is likely to change when we regionalize the elementary?
No, you need to come up to the mic. Do you want the question clarified, or?
Yeah, can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So
into the mic again, please, Cliff. Yeah.
The funding for Berlin, because we're actually considered in the same cost basis as Boston, and Boylston is in the same cost basis as Worcester. So because of that, the teacher salaries are significantly different in Berlin, which gives you a different funding base and gives you a different amount of aid from the state. And because of that, we are actually getting significantly more money per student. So really the question is, when we unify with the two towns, do we all go to the Boston pay scale, or we all go to the Worcester pay scale, and how is that going to affect the overall funding, from the Chapter 70?
So we anticipated some issues with regionalizing causing changes. So because of that, what we've done in the formula is we've said that Chapter 78 in the first year we regionalize will be based off of, for each school, the prior year, so that Berlin Memorial locks in the Chapter 70 support it was getting, as do the other two, and that it will increase by the same percentage as the foundation enrollment, the foundation budget for each school, which is a state formula as well. So state foundation budget drives the Chapter 70 aid. So in essence, what we've done is we've kind of locked in the current Chapter 70 allocation, and then as there's changes in the future, they'll be allocated to each school in an equitable fashion. Does that address your question?
Yeah, the problem is the foundation budget is also linked to the town. So if now it's linked to, I assume it's going to be linked to the district. So if now we have a district that's Berlin and Boylston, it's kind of like Tohoto, which has a Tohoto has a foundation budget per pupil of 97.18, where Berlin is 10.24 and Boylston is 9.51. So because we now regionalize, we're no longer a high-cost town. We're now a high-cost town and low-cost town, so we're going to probably be something in the middle. And that turns out to be about over 100,000 a year loss in aid if we regionalize. And that's what I'm concerned about, is that actually going to happen or not? And how do they keep the two separate?
So, the state will also continue to calculate, and this, trying to think of how to simply describe this, but the state will also continue to calculate the foundation budget for each school and then for the region as a whole, and it will divide it by town. And we are going to allocate it to each school based on its share of the foundation budget, which is really driven by the number of students in each school. And we've looked at this and determined that what it's going to do is essentially mirror pretty closely what's happening right now. And that was the intent of how this was structured. So there's not going to be a significant shift. What in prior regionalization efforts, there was a significant change, and that was because we were allocating these costs on something called the statutory method, which just blends everything together and allocates it. So that is something that prior regionalization efforts did, and it was a legitimate issue. And this regionalization effort with the method that we've selected will be consistent with allocating the aid and the foundation budget to each school with how it's currently being allocated. And that's the reason it's a little bit more complicated. The complication was an issue that's raised. It is a little bit more complicated, but we feel like it's more equitable to maintain what we have now in terms of those splits of money and budgets.
Evie?
I'd like to call the question.
And I heard a second. The motion is non-debatable. We proceed directly to the vote on calling the question. If you vote in favor of calling the question, then we'll move directly to the Article 36 and vote on that. So all those in favor of calling the question, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Thank you. We'll proceed to the vote on Article 36. So the motion is to accept the amended Berlin-Boylston Regional Agreement affecting the unification of the 3 existing school districts to be effective July 1st, 2019, as shown on the copy dated May 7th, which is the one you were handed this evening, 2018, and filed with the town clerk, copies of which have been passed out this evening. All those in favor of accepting this motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And all those opposed? No. And that is a vote. Thank you very much. You've been very responsible. What do I do?
Article 37. Acceptance of the Community Preservation Act.
Hello. Mr. Moderator, on behalf of the Finance Committee, I move that the town hereby accept Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44B, Sections 3 to 7, inclusive, otherwise known as the Massachusetts Community Preservation Act, by approving a 3% surcharge on real property commencing in fiscal year 2020 for the purposes permitted by said act, and that the town hereby accepts the following exemptions from such surcharge permitted under Section 3E of said act. Property owned and occupied as a domicile by any person who qualifies for low-income housing or low or moderate-income senior housing in the town as defined in Section 2 of said act. Isn't legal text exciting? $100,000 of the value of each taxable parcel of residential real property, and $100,000 of the value of each taxable parcel of Class 3 commercial property and Class 4 industrial property as defined in Section 2A of said Chapter 59.
Motion is made and seconded.
to accept the, I'm just going to paraphrase a little bit of it, Massachusetts Community Preservation Act, commencing by approving a 3% surcharge on real property commencing in fiscal year 2020 for the purposes permitted by said act, and that the town accepts certain exemptions, and those exemptions are property owned and occupied as a domicile by any individual who qualifies for low-income housing or low or moderate income senior housing in the town, as defined in Section 2 of the said act. $100,000 of the value of each taxable parcel of residential real property, and $100,000 of the value of each taxable parcel of Class 3 commercial property and Class 4 industrial property as defined in Section 2A of said Chapter 59.
Okay, let me tell you what the heck that's all about. So some of you may have seen this piece of paper as you walked in that we left out for you. It says the CPA in Berlin, and it has some basic information about the Community Preservation Act. I'm now going to tell you what this says. This has pretty pictures. I don't like PowerPoint presentations, so you'll have to forgive me. I am going to pick on some of my neighbors in the interest of making parts of the thing clearer. So if you know me, be afraid. Okay, so what is the Community Preservation Act? It's a state law that allows cities and towns, if they adopt it, to put a surcharge on the dollar amount of the real estate taxes that you pay on your home or that businesses pay on their businesses. It can be used for 4 purposes by the town: affordable housing, historic preservation, open space preservation, and outdoor recreation. As I said, it's funded by a surcharge, and if the surcharge is less than 3%, the state will give you 1 round of matching money every year, which amounts to 25% of what you collect. So if we collected $1 million, we get $250,000. I'm honest, I'm on the finance committee, I can do math in my head, really. If the surcharge is 3%, then you get 2 rounds of matching funds every year from the state. The amount of that match varies, but it's between 33 and 50% based on a survey that we did looking across the state. Part of the reason for that is the matching funds are funded by fees that the state receives when people file deeds and other real estate paperwork. And so the income they get varies per year based on how much real estate activity there was. Let me tell you about the exemptions. First, we're proposing, we being the Finance Committee is proposing this. We are proposing that we adopt the exemption for people who are eligible for state low-income or elderly housing. If they're eligible for those, not using them, understand, but eligible for them, then they are exempt from the surcharge, period. Okay? They do have to file a form with the assessor's office every year to qualify for the exemption, but as long as they file the form and they meet the requirements to get those housing benefits, then they'd be exempt. Second, the first $100,000 of the value of your home would not be counted in calculating the surcharge. And last, largely at the request of farm folk in town, but also small business people, the first $100,000 of the value of commercial and industrial property, including farms, would not be counted for figuring out the surcharge. Is this making sense so far? Okay, cool. I'm getting thumbs up and yes, that's good, I like that. Okay. So here's what you're probably wondering, how much does that really cost, Buzz? So let me give you some examples. Here's where I pick on people. Let's see. about Liz? Liz DeCardia, could you come up here, please? Liz is my PowerPoint presentation, okay? Now, the values that I'm giving for these people's homes, understand, are probably false and merely for purposes of explanation. So let's say that Liz's home is worth $200,000, okay? Here's how we calculate what she'd pay. First, we take off the top 100,000, boom, because we've exempted that. Then we look at how much she would pay in property taxes, multiply that by 3%, if we adopt the 3% rate. That comes out to $57 a year for a $200,000 house, which is $5 a month. I'll keep picking on Liz. I could make other people walk up, but it'll take longer. And we've been here a while. So let's say Liz moves. Liz is doing okay. She gets a new job, and she goes to a $350,000 home here in Berlin. Here's what that would cost. Under a 3% surcharge, $141 a year, which is $12 a month. Okay? Now let's say Liz gets a really, really good promotion and she buys a pocket battleship mansion. Well, okay, it's not that big, but let's say it's $500,000 house, which people have here in Berlin. You know, not many of us, but some of us do. That, under a 3% rate, would cost her, don't you like that I'm moving you up in the world, Liz? Okay, $226 a year or $19 a month. So, thank you for being my PowerPoint presentation. So that's what it would cost people. The cost for businesses is comparable at those values, okay? Now, who decides how the money is spent, you're asking? Do some of us folk in town government run off in a back room and decide that we are going to preserve this building over here, and those of you that don't like it can just growl at us at town meeting, and too bad for you? No, we can't do that. The act would create a local committee, the Community Preservation Committee, made up of the town bodies most responsible for those purposes: affordable housing, historic preservation, open space preservation, and outdoor recreation. And that body would receive applications for people that want the money for one of those four purposes. They would review them to make sure they qualify, and then they would pass on the ones that they think deserve consideration to, guess who? Us, here in town meeting. At town meeting, you would decide how the money is spent. Okay, the only requirements are it has to be approved by that committee as valid, and it has to be for one of those four purposes outlined in the state law, and then we here in town meeting have to approve it. Okay, with me so far? Another nice thing about it is this is money that the state law permits us to save this over time. You do not have to expend all the money you raise in 1 year. So if there's a big project that we want in town for open space preservation, like last night when we were talking about farms that might end up being subdivisions, this money could be spent, for instance, to buy the development rights if the Conservation Commission wanted to apply for some money to do that. And that would be money for the farmer, and it would mean that the land is locked in for agricultural use. Okay? That's something we could do with it. We decide how it's spent. I said that. Town meeting decides. If we here tonight approve this, what we are doing is sending the question to the ballot in November. Because in order for the town to adopt the Community Preservation Act, it has to be approved at town meeting, us here, and then it has to be approved at the ballot, and the next eligible ballot is the one in the fall. The reason for that is we have to notify the Secretary of State and then give at least X amount of notice, which puts it past the time when we'd have the town election a week from now. Okay? A few other items about it. These purposes are money that are things the town commonly spends funds on and that we appropriate from elsewhere. This would allow us to save funds, like a savings account, rather than borrowing lots of funds, like a credit card. Though I should say, it is permissible under the Act, if you want to fund something larger, you can borrow, if the town meeting authorizes it, against future expected receipts from CPA money. That is permissible. We don't have to do that, but we can. Okay? According to the town assessor, I went and asked Molly, who, if you haven't met Molly, is very knowledgeable about this because she used to work in a town that has already adopted CPA, like half the cities and towns in Massachusetts have. And she went and ran the numbers, and a 3% rate would raise $230,000 a year in Berlin. That's before matching funds, of course. With the matching funds, if we had a 3% rate, we'd get 2 rounds. We'd probably raise somewhere in the vicinity of $300,000 a year for these purposes, which again, we could save if we wanted to do something larger in future years. I think that's all I have to say, other than the Economic Development Committee chose to have a vote on this as well, and they voted 4 in favor and 1 abstention, so we appreciate their support. Now, I'm going to move to the other mic over there, because this is me speaking as the Finance Committee, and there's something that I can't say as me as the Finance Committee, so just a moment.
If you're done.
Okay, this is Buzz speaking as Buzz, resident of the town of Berlin, 21 Village Lane. I encourage you to vote for this. Thank you.
Peter Hoffman. Yep. Peter, you speak. Trudy, you come up and be ready.
Okay, bear with me. I'm speaking as Peter Hoffman, not Economic Development Committee member. We were pretty enthusiastic, and I was pretty enthusiastic when we voted in favor for it. I'm still in favor of this article, but I dove a little bit deeper into this. Allow me to explain. It's a bit complicated. So the CPA was adopted in the year 2000. It's been around for a while, it's matured, and I'm sorry I'm reading from a statement, but I wanted to get this all out in such a way that was understandable. It's matured a bit. I hope you can stay with me. I got, for those of you that might be tracking this on a laptop or an iPad, you can go to communitypreservation.org, which is the website for this act. That's where I got the information I'm presenting to you. So I'm going to read you something verbatim from the site. DOR issues record low estimate for fall 2018 CPA trust fund distribution. The DOR has issued its annual budget memo to municipalities. It includes an estimate of 11.5%. This will make sense in a minute. 11.5% for November 2018 first round CPA trust fund distribution. As in the past, this is the figure that all communities with a local surcharge of less than 3% should use when finalizing their FY19 CPA budget. Cities and towns that adopted a surcharge, as Buzz is proposing, of 3% will receive additional funding in rounds 2 and 3. One more passage and then I'll shorten this up. In recent years, the CPA was adopted by more communities and the real estate market declined. The base trust fund distribution decreased dramatically. To address this decline, Governor Patrick signed legislation to update the CPA in 2013. The bill included a new revenue source. Revenues required to fund the matching funds. It doesn't just come from a line item that's guaranteed. So the bill included a new revenue source to provide additional funding for the trust over and above the revenue from the deeds recording fee, as Buzz had mentioned. As a result, $25 million from the state's FY13 budget surplus was added to the trust fund prior to November 13 distribution. Another $11 million was added in 14, $10 million in 15. No surplus funding was available in 16, so the coalition, which is the organization, the parent organization, has been advocating for legislation to provide more stable funding for the future. The point here is the matching funds that Buzz talks about, and he's right, are variable. They're not guaranteed by any stretch. So from 2002 through 2007, when it was small, it was at 100% of matching funds. And then it started to decline from 68% and down to 11% now. I'm not suggesting that this is a bad idea. Listen on for a moment. But the matching funds will be lower than we'd hope because the state is not funding it as we would like it to. If I'm not mistaken, this article failed in 2001 and 2006. Barry, correct me if I'm wrong. But it's been here before, way before my time. Lastly, I'd like the town leadership, if this passes, to level spend. Let me try to explain what I mean by that. So we heard the playground article last night, and 20,000 of it would come from taxpayer money and 30 from mitigation. So that would be an allowable use. As Buzz said, open space, housing, historic, and recreation. And the reason I know it's an allowable use is because I looked up some recent uses. And believe it or not, the first one that came out is in Abington in 2017, replacement of broken playground equipment for Arnold and Laidler Park. I can't quite see. Replacement of wood chips and fence at Laidler. So the point is that if we spend 20,000, if this act passes today and it passes at ballot and it's matched and so on, if we spent 20,000 on the playground as we did last night, we could instead reduce our town budget by 20,000 and spend the 20,000 that comes from this. So I'm hopeful that if this passes, the town leadership will level spend, and I hope that made some sense. In the end, I'm leaning towards voting for the measure. That said, it might be more advantageous to wait until the state better funds their contributions before passing this measure. It's a struggle to understand what to really do, but I hope that made sense, and if it didn't, forgive me. Thanks.
Trudy, pull the mic off. Yeah. Don't pull it up. There you go.
I'm Trudy Trevor. I live on Gates Pond Road. Most of you people know me. I am one of the people that get an abatement on my home because I'm over 70. Does that help, or will I be part of the people that have to pay more money because of the value of my house?
The value of your house doesn't actually matter, as far as I know. I should say I'm not an attorney, but are you eligible based on your income for state subsidized elderly or low-income housing, whether you're using it or not?
No,
Okay.
it's an abatement under the tax law.
Pardon?
It's an abatement under the tax law. Somebody from assessors could address that. I'm not sure whether that would be the thing that this does or not.
Is there an assessor here? No. Every time I get in trouble, I can't find the right person.
Yes, I mean, we have town council sitting over here. Hi. He's looking at me like, oh, God. So my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's based on the income of the person, the owner of the home living in the home. Is that correct? I can't. You'd have to come up and ask from the front, but please do if you have a question.
Yes, that is an income. That is an income thing. I'm just not sure whether the two are the same thing or not.
It's, as Buzz read at the beginning, one of the exemptions, which if that's adopted, is for a person, who lives in the home, who qualifies for low-income housing or for low or moderate-income senior housing. And so that is a factor of the tax laws. So if you happen to qualify for that under the law, if that's the basis of your abatement, I don't know, then this tax surcharge would not apply to your tax bill.
Yeah.
And everybody gets an exemption on the first 100,000 of their valuation anyway. So people that have a residence or a property that's of lower value would get a lot of it off because of that. The first 100,000.
They evaluate my house at $400,000. It's an 1830 original.
Yeah.
So, you know, that makes me in the upper thing, amount of money.
At least a quarter of it would be exempt. And depending on, if you've got the low-income thing, you could get more, but I don't know the answer to that.
Because I'm living on my Social Security now.
Oh, yeah.
He's gone, so.
Wayne?
I just think for people that are concerned, do you know what the dollar amount is that of income that allows people to qualify as for housing? I mean, it's just when you're being general like that, I think it makes people concerned. So I would guess that a lot of fixed income people don't, but if you know the figure, that would be helpful.
Bob?
Hi, Bobby Wheeler, 32 West Street. Just a question. We vote this in. I'm all for preservation, and, you know, all this. We could vote it for 1%. I think you start out low. But my question is, can this rise per vote every year, like from, you know, 1 to 4 to blah, blah, blah through the years? Or is it capped at 3? At the point, or are we just, you know, if we voted in at 1 now, which would put some money, you know, into a great place, and then we move forward from here, well, we think about it, but it, you know what I mean? Can this just blow up into like somebody, you know, every meeting saying, oh, we'll go from 1, 3, 4, 5, you know, up to, for preservation. Preservation's great. That's my question.
Buzz, would you answer that?
Sure. There are two things I'll say in answer to that. When you pick the percentage at the beginning, and the Finance Committee is proposing 3% in order to be eligible for as much state matching money as possible. And by the way, I'm curious about Peter's information, because there's, in the statute, it says the minimum match for the first round is 25%. So it could be the state's violating its own law. That wouldn't be the first time. But it does say that anyway. The percentage that you adopt, it can't be higher than 3%, period. The 3%, each year it's a 3% surcharge, and it cannot be higher than that by the statute. Ever. The statute doesn't permit it. It says you can put a surcharge of up to 3% on it. Yeah. The second is, after 5 years, after a town or a city initially adopts the Community Preservation Act, you get the opportunity to opt out of it if we want to. So we can do it for 5 years and see what we think, and under the statute, if we want to opt out at that point, we can do so with very little trouble. Thereafter, if we wanted to go back to it, we'd have to do this all over again. And by the way, if whatever percentage we set, if you wanted to change the percentage, we'd have to do this all over again. And when the Finance Committee was looking at this, we looked at the percentages. And to give you some examples, as I said, we went for 3% because it maximizes the state matching money. The other reason we decided to go for 3% is the dollar amount that people pay each month doesn't change dramatically from 1 to 3%. 1 to 3% is a pretty small percentage. So for instance, if you had a $200,000 house, you'd pay $5 a month under 3%, a bit more than $3 at 2%, and $1.60 at 1%. And if you had a $350,000 house, the difference would be $12 a month at 3%, $8 a month at 2%, $4 a month at 1%. The impact on what the town gets At 1%, we'd get $76,000 a year that we would collect before matching funds. At 2%, we'd get $152,000 a year before matching funds. So the Finance Committee decided to recommend the 3. Thank you.
Yes. I'll watch it. I got to look to the left, too.
Jerry Freed, 12 Brook Lane. A couple of points I'd like to make, and for full disclosure, I worked with a group of us on trying to get this passed. I think it was 14 or 15 years ago. One point which is very important to me is I like to get value for my money. I don't like to pay taxes, none of us do, but the money that was referred to, that the state puts in to that bucket every year, comes out of our taxes. We've paid that money. There are 63 units in Meadowbrook, where I live. Some of those are being sold for the third time. Every time one of those changes hands, part of what is paid for that unit goes into that fund. It can't go anywhere else by statute. It's a small percentage, I don't remember exactly, but it's part of the statute that every real estate transaction in this state, a piece of that money the state puts into that bucket that is reserved for the CPA. So my feeling is I've already put money in there. My tax money is sitting there. There are 100 plus towns across this state that are taking that money out. I have a little cottage in Westport, Mass. They have a CPA. So I'm paying money in there too. But at least the town is able to build recreation facilities, do repairs, do all of the things that are mentioned and specified here. So I want to get some of that money back. I want to get some value for the taxes that I've paid, and anybody who has bought a house in this town or in any town in the last 17 years has paid into that CPA fund at the state. And the question comes up, it did before, it may again tonight or in your minds, that money can't go anywhere else. Unless the state has a rebellion and the state legislature changes that, they're not about to do that, because the outcry from all these towns that have passed the CPA would be terrific. I think people would be voted out of office. One other point, which nobody has mentioned, but we get a lot of mitigation money. And I think we put it to pretty good use, and it helps reduce our taxes and does a lot of good things. But I believe it runs out, or at least some of it runs out in 2020. How are we going to replace the money that's been coming from these shopping malls? I think the CPA is a good thing. I think we should do it.
Can we do it?
I'd like to call the question.
Is there a second? Second. Motion made and seconded for the to call the question. This again cuts off debate. I will ask you to vote. It requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor of the call to the question, meaning that we will stop debate at this time, say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Okay, you can talk about it somewhere else, and the rest of us are going to vote. Okay, I'm going to go through this one more time. I move that the town hereby accept Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44B, Section 3 to 7 inclusive, otherwise known as the Massachusetts Community Preservation Act, by approving a 3% surcharge on real property commencing in fiscal year 2020 for the purposes presented by said act. And that we have the 3 exemptions that were mentioned earlier. Property owned and occupied as a domicile by any person who qualifies for low-income housing or low or moderate-income senior housing in the town, as defined in Section 2 of said act. $100,000 of the value for each taxable parcel of residential real property, and $100,000 of the value of each taxable parcel of Class 3 commercial property and Class 4 industrial property as defined in Section 2A of said Chapter 59. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. Motion carries in the affirmative. And that's a simple thing. Okay. Article 38, Town Administrative Research, Town Management Study Committee. You have a motion for Article 38, sir?
Wayne Texera, Gates Pond Road. I move to authorize the Town Management Study Committee to continue planning modification to town government and the creation of a town administrator position to be presented at a future town meeting.
Motion made and seconded to authorize the Town Management Study Committee to continue planning modification to town government and the creation of a town administrator position to be presented at a future town meeting. Wayne.
I'm here on behalf of the 5-member Town Management Study Committee, which was formed last year at the annual town meeting. And so our committee has been meeting since the fall, looking at the at town government and creating a town, the potential of creating a town administrator position. So in doing our research, I'm going to share some facts with you. I don't know if any of you have been to our public forums or read our report. Hopefully you did. But basically, 93% of the communities in Massachusetts do have some form of professional town management. Of the 351 communities, 325 have professional town management. Only 26 do not, and only 6 of those are in Worcester County. Only 1 is east of us, and all the rest are to our west. And of the positions, there are 16 different titles for different professional administrators. 176 are town administrators, 74 are managers. And you can see based on the map, red marks those that do not. You can see Berlin is basically the farthest to the east, except for a community on the Elizabeth Islands. And all the black communities are cities and towns, which are mayoral types typically. In doing our research, we met with town officials and committee members. We met with the Division of Local Services from the Department of Revenue, Central Mass Regional Planning Committee, other town administrators, public forums, and we also did a survey of town residents, and 79% of those responded did support the town administrator type position that we had described. As part of our analysis and talking with the town and doing our research, we came up with these following challenges that face Berlin. There is increasingly complex procedural and legal regulatory environment across the state and our country. It's over and above what can reasonably be expected for the average citizen volunteer. And the need for technical support is important, and the knowledge gap that exists between town officials and what we need to know to be successful and navigate municipal government creates risk. Human resources, compliance, information technology management, project management functions currently in town are often at a minimum level, and that also creates risk, as well as lost opportunities for better functioning and savings. There are inefficiencies inherent in decentralized town government in planning, procedures, and oversight. There's lack of day-to-day management and leadership, and that can result in communications, challenges between departments and committees, missed opportunities, and liability exposure. Also, the lack of centralized financial oversight, which a position like this would perform, creates, issues of setting fiscal goals, managing budget, the process, managing procurement, monitoring expenditures, wasted time and funding, and missed funding opportunities. I want to say at this standpoint, because it sounds so negative that we're criticizing town government, that our committee knows that, and I think all of you know, that we are really fortunate, as I said earlier in one of my comments, to have the town volunteers and government that we have. Our town functions extremely well, but that does not mean that the town could function better in the environment that exists today, that is increasingly complex. So a town administrator role and responsibility, they would serve as the chief administrative officer of the town under the policy supervision of the elected select board. And their key responsibilities would be financial management, day-to-day operations, personnel administration, financial policies, and planning. And it always does come down to the dollars and cents that everybody wonders, what would hiring a town administrator cost our town? So we did look at other towns in our region. We looked across the state at different ones, and we're presenting these figures here for you. I believe they're in our handout. To just give you a sense of, what our town budget is, what our population is, and how it compares to other towns, and what the town administrator salaries are in these other towns. We have to compete for, hiring talent in hiring a position like this, and so it's important to understand where the salary ranges fall. It's not an inexpensive position, and for the reason for that is because it's a position that would have experience, knowledge, education, and that's important to compete. From a fiscal cost, it would basically be a salary we are estimating at around $90,000 to $100,000 salary with benefits, an estimate of around 120 to 130. And again, that is based on, hiring talent that is going to do the right thing for our town and be competitive to keep somebody in that position. Instead of being a training grounds, we want that level of professionalism. So benefits of a town administrator for the town, it would allow and that's really what this is all about, is it would allow the select board to focus on policy setting and leadership, empower town administrator to handle the day-to-day management and oversight. An experienced professional with knowledge of municipal government provides stability and continuity as elected officials change. It provides technical support to the select board, improved financial management and control through oversight of the financial team and acting as a budget director. Project management and asset oversight would avoid issues and provide better fiscal controls. We also believe it would encourage citizen volunteerism for elected positions. I think one of the challenges why people perhaps don't volunteer for things is they look at the hours that are put in by our select board and other boards, and to think of what that is and right now they certainly have support with Mary, but the level of technical support is really challenging. Other benefits would be that it would improve communication and coordination between the departments and better function and efficiency, provide day-to-day support, supervision, and oversight for those that report to the select board. It would allow current employees to focus on their primary jobs by having the town administrator handle tasks outside their normal scope. Some of the examples of that would be, I had no idea until I served in this committee that our police chief has been our IT specialist, and that human resources, while we do not have a current personnel committee, is basically handled by the treasurer or the accountant. They handle some functions, but again, that's what we're talking about at minimal levels. It would also reduce liability and compliance exposures. So to just boil it down, the reasons for a town administrator is that we have an increasingly complex and legal regulatory environment surrounding all aspects of town operations, and it's really over and above what can reasonably be expected for the average citizen to know. Issues and responsibilities are really becoming too demanding for a town to really expect its elected officials to operate without specific expertise and training to be able to manage it without support. The town needs and should think about providing elected officials with the support they need. It's an investment in the future of our town to ensure that the town government operates efficiently, effectively, irrespective of changes in town officials. I'm just sort of reading off a PowerPoint. It sounds so much drier than when I've talked at other public forums. But, I guess I'll just summarize by saying we have a great town. I think that, we come to town meeting, we look at all of the things. There are so many examples, I think, that our committee sat over the last 2 days listening to and thinking how much smoother some issues could go, questions that could be answered if there was somebody there coordinating on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't take anything away from our select board. There's only 2 of them here tonight. We talked with them and learned a lot about all the projects, the extra time that's put in, the expertise that some of them have that lends itself to the town functioning, and what would the town do if that expertise was not there. I just feel that it's really important. I speak on behalf of our committee in recommending the approval of this article, and I can also tell you that talking with all of the other town employees and department heads, that they wholeheartedly support this by and large from what we've seen. So thank you very much.
Is there someone who wants to speak on this motion? Otherwise, does anybody want to speak? Yes, sir.
MJ State East, 35 Carter Street, and hopefully this is an easy question because I know we all want to get the hell out of here, but I think it was your first slide said something about like 175 towns have administrators and about 75 had managers, but I didn't catch anything that said what the difference was and what the hell that meant. So could find that out.
Well, having talked plenty long at a lot of other meetings, I guess maybe we made it a little shorter. But the real difference between there are so many different positions, and so the statutes that allow towns to accept it from the state really don't define the role. So basically, the role of a town manager tends to be one that is granted more authority, and a town administrator sometimes has moderate authority. I guess what I didn't even explain or say as I stand up here, and it wasn't in our slides, is that the whole purpose of what we're asking you to vote on tonight is not to say, yes, we're going to have a town administrator, and you aren't going to get to know what that is. What you're basically authorizing is understanding that the town does need this type of a management position. You've seen a basic outline of what those types of duties would be. And so from here, if it was voted, the Town Management Study Committee would continue on to actually work to develop language for a special act, which would develop a job description, a hiring process, define all of those roles of exactly what a town administrator would do and what their powers would be. So this is not the end game of knowing exactly how the position is constituted. But the town, we've listened to the concerns. I mean, we're not making a recommendation for an exact defined job at this point, but those overall responsibilities would be there. So the difference between a town manager and a town administrator comes down to generally authority. It tends to be a far more centralized government where there's a lot of appointed positions, and in our town there's still a lot of elected positions. And we also felt that we certainly appreciate that the town appreciates the character that it has and the way town meeting runs, and that a town administrator with a moderate level of authority that would allow a town administrator to act on a daily basis. Right now, selectmen, when they have to make a decision, these two select persons here could not meet outside of a select board meeting and discuss anything about town without violating open meeting laws. So it's really a method to allow, efficiencies, and we would be creating that position, through the next phase, which would come back to a town meeting for vote, in order to be then sent to the legislature for approval. So I totally missed that point because it wasn't in our slide, but hopefully that explains it.
Is there anybody that wants to speak against the motion? Hearing no one, can we move to a vote? Okay, the motion is to authorize the Town Management Study Committee to continue planning modification to town government and the creation of a town administrator position to be presented at future town meeting. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries by unanimous vote. Please be with us for just a second more. We've got a couple more things we have to take care of. We have Article 33 from last night that we need to come back to. That's the one about the solar arrays, page 101 in the book. Ron Vavriska of the Planning Board.
I move to amend. I move to amend the motion on the floor by replacing it with the following. I move to amend the zoning bylaw, section 590, large-scale ground-mounted solar photovoltaic installations, by adding a new section 593, as described in Article 33 of the warrant for this meeting, and to amend section 320, table of principal use regulations, as described in Article 33 of the warrant for this meeting.
Okay, we still have, when we can bring this back up, we have the motion on the floor from last night, which had been discussed at length, but was found to have some defects. So this is a motion to amend that by replacing it with a new motion. The new motion is to amend the zoning bylaw, section 590, large-scale ground-mounted solar photovoltaic installations, by adding a new section 593 as described in Article 33 of the warrant for this meeting, and to amend section 320, table of principal use regulations as described in Article 3 of the warrant for this meeting. That's moved and seconded. At this point, the debate is over whether to use this replacement motion or whether to go back to the previous motion. Does anyone want to speak in regard to that amendment? Now, this isn't going to be as a main motion. This is just changing it from the old motion to the new motion.
Rich Mariani, Gates Pond Road. My question is, what is the difference exactly between the amended motion and, is there any significant difference other than the numbers change?
The original motion left out section 320, which is the table of uses that wasn't in the original motion from last night.
Oh, okay. But it is in the town report?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
This motion essentially makes it the motion that was intended under the original article. Okay, I'll ask you to vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the new substitute motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Okay, now we go back to the new motion as our main motion on the floor, and that is to make these amendments. What?
Was that unanimous?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does anyone want to speak further to the whole matter? Okay.
Rich Mariani again, Gates Pond Road. I'll be brief on this. We spoke at length about this last night. And we also had a meeting with the planning board prior to town meeting, and they were very gracious. And I thank you for that, Ron. That was good. We appreciate the attention. My objection, and most of the folks that are with me here from Gates Pond Road, is that why would we want to open the entire town, this beautiful town, up to large-scale solar power plants? They're power plants. They're not farms. They're power plants. And the 25-acre minimum restriction for one of these power plants covers 1 million square feet. 1,089,000 square feet. Now, the issue was brought up, well, look, you got to have 50 acres, and 25 acres will be set aside for conservation, so they can only use 25 acres. So if you're sitting, I don't know, Randall Road, Bellevue Road, Gates Pond Road, wherever, and you go, you know, there's only about 8 or 9 parcels in town that are really 50-acre parcels. So how would that affect me? Well, you can also, if I was a solar developer, you could also buy a 20-acre plot here and a 30-acre plot here, right next to each other. Now I got 50 acres. A solar power plant, and you've seen them on the Mass Pike, you've seen them everywhere, create dead space. There's nothing attractive about them. Nothing comes from them for any of us other than some tax money for the town. And a huge windfall for the solar power plant organizers, which they're entitled to. So what I'm saying is, we have a current zoning bylaws in place for this. Why change it to open up residential agricultural? Because residential means every one of you sitting here today are living in a residential area. You might not have 50 acres across from you, you might, but there might be 50 acres down the road, and as you ride in, ride out, sit on your porch, you'll be looking at least 1 million square feet, that's 25 acres, of dead space. Not to mention what it does to the wildlife habitat in our area. Deer, bluebirds, all of those lovely little creatures are displaced. And for what? So I'm saying, let's leave it the way it was, or minimum, let's zone it for limited industrial. There is limited industrial zoning in this town, and if a guy wants to come in and put in a solar power plant, then maybe we change the zoning law to limited industrial. Thank you.
Tim Wheeler.
Did I answer the question?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The question was, why are we doing this? And the reason is preserve the farms, to give the farmers an alternative to breaking up their farms into building lots. And that is the why.
Tim?
Thank you. Tim Wheeler, 240 Pleasant Street. I'm not speaking on behalf of the planning board, but I wanted to reflect on how I came to the position of supporting this article. So, in the fall, a number of individuals came to us on the planning board and said that they were aware of a parcel of land in town that was in a position of developing a solar facility on it, and they had gone to the ZBA, as you would expect they would do, and were turned down because it was in the residential agricultural zone. And when we began to meet with the landowner, it became clear that in this individual case, there were really two choices. It was either to find an alternative to selling off for housing development, or looking for the alternative, which in their case was this possible solar operation. So the planning board crafted a text, essentially, that would allow, as has been suggested, a parcel of greater than 50 acres to develop an amount of land that could be equally protected by an offset piece, so essentially you can develop no more than half of it. And the notion was that if the ZBA, through site plan approval and the special permit process, put into place the protections in terms of screening and such, that you could probably find a number of sites on these parcels where you could locate a solar operation and have minimal impact on the abutters, and end up in a position where the parcel would not be developed for residential use. Now, often in the past, the Conservation Commission has been able to come in and pick up or acquire a piece. Often these pieces are in 61A and the town gets the right of first refusal. But the Conservation Commission has expended a significant amount of its money and isn't in a position at this time to acquire any number of parcels. So the thought was that rather than having a parcel subdivided, which essentially means the opportunity for it to come back to be a farm in the future is eliminated, if you would allow the solar operation to set up, and usually those are 25-year leases, at the end of that lease, the town might very well be in a position where it then could decide to protect that land in perpetuity if it thought that it was appropriate, or it could allow it to be developed at that point into residential use, perhaps. So, I mean, we asked the assessors to come up with a list of parcels that exceed 50 acres, and there are some that have already been protected through recent efforts by the Conservation Commission. The Oberg piece, the town put a zoning restriction on a piece at the Woodlands that's over on the Boylston line. And in the other parcels, there's the Rainville piece on, the end of Linden. There's the POTUS piece on Randall. There's several pieces at Balance Rock. There are 2 pieces at Indian Head. There's 1 piece at the corner of Lyman and Linden. And there's another piece off of Highland that belongs to the Baum family. I think the point that I'm trying to make is that if it's possible to delay the development of those parcels into residential use, which every consultant that we've worked with over the years on the planning board has said to us does not generate enough income to cover the costs that are incurred as a result of residential development, you're really better off if you can find a way to hold that land and not see it develop for residential purposes. Now, in the case of solar, the town tends to benefit through the tax revenue, the pilot agreement that's usually generated. We have a solar operation on River Road. You voted that change in the bylaw a number of years ago, and you voted for the pilot agreement. The town generates about $82,000 a year in revenue. That far exceeds anything that land ever paid in the past, and it had been zoned as limited industrial for a number of years. The possibility of spot zoning a parcel for limited industrial use has been suggested, opens up the opportunity for uses beyond just solar. And I think this bylaw, because it's specific to solar, is far more appropriate way to deal with some of those opportunities. So, I'd encourage you to support this article, because I think, as I've demonstrated here, it's primarily these parcels that families have owned for a long period of time. Their intent is to continue to own them. They don't want to sell them and see them developed into residential uses. And the opportunity to seek out this avenue as a positive opportunity for them. So thank you very much.
Hi, Dave Chevette, 11 Village Lane. I listened to the gentleman who was up earlier, and I had some strong reactions to that, unsurprisingly. This proposal is not about, at its face value, the idea of, oh, don't turn the farms into power plants. At its surface sounds very dramatic and very terrible, because when people say power plants, nice choice of wording there, they think coal plants, they think nuclear plants, they think messes and whatnot. That's not what this is. This is a bunch of glass in a field that is preventing that pollution, that's preventing that damage, that's preventing that hurt. Solar panels are clean. They generate power. So the concept that this doesn't have any benefit to us, to everyone, I think is short-sighted. These type of panels, these type of installations are one of the best uses of open space available right now. So let's turn that around. Let's say we don't use it. Let's say we don't approve this, and those properties are still in the ownership of the private owner. Those people can't afford that land anymore. They can't afford to keep it up. They can't afford the property taxes. They can't afford to keep it. Particularly when a developer comes in and dangles big wheelbarrows full of money at them and says, give me your farm. I will build McMansions on it. I will build these big properties. I will build apartment buildings. That's not what I want in my town. I love this town. I've lived here for over 10 years and been involved in it for 15 plus. And I would much rather see solar panels being put up into a field than have it turned into row houses and buildings that do nothing and hurt everyone and everything. Thanks.
Ron?
How we doing? Don POTUS, 344 Randall Road. I do have 50 acres on Randall Road, and I believe this article was drafted because I was looking for solar panels. And like Tim said, so I can afford to stay in the town. Everything's going out of sight as far as finances go. And the other alternative I have is a realtor or a developer. And I was in touch with one developer, and he was very aggressive. He wants to come in and knock my barn and house down and put up condos or whatever he can. So I'm asking for a yes vote on this to go through so I can possibly stay in town. Now, if I can, could I have a representative come in and just?
Yes, but let's keep it brief.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity here to speak. I'll be brief. A lot of what I plan to say here has been...
First, tell them who you are.
My name's Ernie Mello. I'm with 0 Point Development, speaking on behalf of Don. Much of what I had planned to say has kind of been covered already today. Sorry about that. But I think the important thing to look at here is that Don has owned this piece of property for quite some time now, for generations it's been in his family, and he's nearing his retirement. He's looking for a way to monetize this property. But most importantly, he's looking to do it in a way that benefits both himself and his family and the town as well. So he's got interest from developers for other options that don't require zoning amendments, would not require us to be here in front of the town to do, and those opportunities may not be viewed as beneficial to the town as the potential for solar. They would drain there would be more drain on the town's municipal services. Solar, the use of solar is what we call a passive use, and it really has virtually zero drain on the town's fire department, police department, school system, traffic. These arrays don't throw parties at night. They're healthy. I know there's a lot of concerns about health, glare, wildlife. These arrays are put in airports, they're put on hospitals, they're put on the side of the Mass Pike. It's a use that's incentivized by the state and kind of pushed to be developed in Massachusetts. It avoids our dependence on foreign fuels. There's a lot of benefits that go into this use of solar. And again, zero drain on the town's municipal services, along with the valuable and significant tax benefits for the town. I think it's, and I hope that it's viewed as a positive. I can say, because we've been working with the planning board and the zoning board on the creation of this article. It's through experience in the other towns throughout Central Mass. It's one of the most, I think, well thought out amendments to a zoning bylaw. It's a creative way. There's a number of different things. The 50-acre minimum requirement, there's already the existing language in a very well-written and thorough section in the bylaws that addresses how large-scale solar is regulated here. This opportunity kind of opens the options for that use to be in the residential agricultural district to a handful of parcels. I think there was 8 that are over 50 acres right now. So it just kind of opens up the possibility there. There's, the foresight, the planning board had the foresight to include the ability to protect the open space here by putting the requirement to put that restriction on an equal amount of property that gets developed for solar. So it's a way, in a very creative way, that the planning board's been able to put in the protection of open space into this amendment. So I guess, and the last thing that I had was, the developers, anybody looking to go through this process, even with the pass of this amendment tonight, would still be required to go through this special permit process with the zoning board, who, would have the power and the authority to regulate the design and screening associated with the project to make sure that the town's best interests are looked after, the site screened appropriately from abutters and public way. So I hope that, it's viewed as a positive here rather than a negative, and that people will think that tonight. So, thank you.
Tim? Oh, sorry.
Tim Wysocki, I'm speaking first on behalf of the Energy Committee. I would just like to reiterate that the Energy Committee does support this amendment. Secondly, I'd like to speak personally and call the question.
Can't do that.
Nope.
Not even, but somebody else can. Or we can just have nobody ask to talk. We can have nobody ask to talk, and that's another way that works.
I'm sorry, but I just
Make
need
it
a
quick.
clarification. The gentleman said he would like to see fields with solar panels in them. He won't see it under this bylaw because they have to be blocked from view.
Jim McNichol. Please say something new.
Jim McNichol, 113 Boylston Road. A couple of quick questions. One, can existing uses that are on that land, so if these are farmlands with, say, farmhouses and barns, can those still stay within, if it's only 50 acres, can those still stay? And can ancillary uses of that, say horse training or sheep grazing around these things occur to maintain a character, or does it have to be totally set aside what's left of the acreage?
No, it's our intention that the land set aside be used in its present use. If it was farmland, it could still be used as farmland. But that would depend upon the restriction that would be written when the special permit is issued.
Okay, and can you, because I tried to go home last night and read the special permit process, can somebody just explain a little bit about what can be requested and done in the special permit? I mean, how extensive you can require the sighting and the visuals and all that on the... Somebody?
Lynn Ryan of the Board of Appeals.
Not to be redundant from last night, but the special permit is in fact like a license. It's not a given. It's something that the ZBA could either grant or not grant. They can put whatever reasonable restrictions they feel are necessary in order to meet the needs of the neighbors and the town. We try to be reasonable people, and I'm sure that if farming is something that needs to continue or wants to continue, that I personally, not as a member of the ZBA, but personally, would like to see that. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Bobby? It's late. I hope if people talk, they'll talk about something new.
Nope. Known Donnie my whole life. He's trying to do right by the town. Oh, sorry. Hello. Known Donnie my whole life. He's trying to do right by the town. He's trying to do something good rather than them banging his door down for development. And as the project stands, and it's all subject to site review and everything that anything has to go through, but with the way the project stands now and they're looking at it, you are going to drive up Randall Road and you will see no difference in the site of the field, the barn, everything. It'll look the same. This is on a parcel out in the woods. Nobody's going to see it. It'll be, maybe from a helicopter or the air, but otherwise you're going to be able to drive up and still have the scenic view that you have now, and he's got full intentions of the town and anybody that wants to put in on it. I just, talking his behalf on myself, I think it's a great opportunity for him rather than develop it into a bunch of houses, so.
Thank you. This is, now it's me that it's turned down. This is a change in the bylaw that would create other uses for other people than just the one.
Hi. Move to call the question.
The question is, I heard a second on that.
Second.
And I will ask you to vote to call a question. All those in favor of stopping debate, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Okay, we're going to stop debate. Now, I declare that a two-thirds vote. And now we go back to the motion, which is to make the amendments as originally written in the article. And I'll ask for the vote on the main motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Motion carries in the affirmative. No. Two-thirds. Oh, I declare a two-thirds vote. We have one more little thing we have to take care of. Buzz.
I'm so very sorry. Okay, Dennis Fairbay. It's all his fault. And the fact that I couldn't add. We made an error last night when we changed one of the pieces of the budget because we gave Dennis some money back. I'm all okay with Dennis getting the money back. So, I move to reconsider the action taken on general government under Article 8 to correct an error. We have to do this in two pieces. This is part one.
This is a motion to reconsider our action last night under general government, under Article 8, because we found a mistake that needs to be corrected or we get in a mess trying to set our tax rate. Therefore, I've accepted the motion to reconsider. Is there anything to be said for or against reconsideration?
Just take my word for it and say
Hearing
yes.
nothing, I'll ask that you vote. All those in favor of reconsidering that action, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Thank you. That's a unanimous vote.
Okay. Here's the replacement. I move to change the total approved for general government in the Finance Committee's fiscal year 2019 budget to $1,020,194.
Motion made and seconded to change the total approved for general government to $1,020,194.
This is what happens when you make changes to the budget on the floor of town meeting and want us to do it quickly. We goofed. So this is correcting the error. Yeah, it's $1,000 less if you're not catching up.
Which otherwise we have to explain to the State Department of Revenue, or we don't get a tax rate, and it drives us nuts.
So we're just fixing that.
Anything to be said on this motion? Hearing nothing, I'll ask you to vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Unanimous vote in favor. Now we have the motion. Yes.
I move to adjourn this meeting to Monday, May 14th, 2018, at 12 noon at the Berlin Town Offices, 23 Linden Street, lower level, at which time and place the polls will be open for the election of town officers under Article 39, and that following the announcement of the results of the election, this meeting be dissolved.
Motion is made and seconded. This adjourns it to noontime to start our election, after which, when the election is completed, this meeting will be officially dissolved. Anything to be said on this adjournment motion? Hearing nothing, I'll ask you to vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Unanimous vote. Thank you very much. If you'll help us with chairs, thank you very much.